the whole process of building the house was evaluating the past and then looking at the future. And then now in the present, how do we meld those things together? And given the technology that we have, how do we bring these materials and innovate?
Welcome to the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast, the show where you learn how to plan, build, and live the tiny lifestyle. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and my guest this week is Amanda Gunawan from OWIU Studio. Known for her signature Japanese-inspired design ethos, Amanda is dedicated to sustainable development. And in this conversation, we talk about designing minimalist spaces, designing spaces that last, what that means to her, and just keeping sustainability in mind when you design. Amanda doesn't design tiny houses, but I think that there's a lot of crossover and things that can be learned from just hearing conversations with other designers who incorporate different design aesthetics into the work that they do. I hope you stick around. But first, I want to remind you that my free Tiny House Summit is fast approaching. The Tiny House Summit includes 30 expert sessions. Many of the speakers are past guests on the podcast, some of my favorite past guests, and these are 30-minute lightning-focused sessions to help you plan, build, and live tiny. The whole thing is happening the weekend of November 4th, and registration is completely free. The catch is that you need to be registered in order to attend. So make sure to head over to tinyhousesummit.co to register for the free summit. Again, that's tinyhousesummit.co. I can't wait to share the Tiny House Summit with you. I'll see you in November. All right, I am here with Amanda Gunawan. Amanda is the founding partner of boutique architecture and design firm OWIU Studio. Known for her signature Japanese-inspired design ethos, Amanda is dedicated to sustainable development, which she believes is twofold: preventing construction waste and creating spaces that last. In 2022, Amanda was included in both Architectural Digest's 10 Asian American Creatives to Watch and Design and Architecture magazine's Architects to Watch respective lists. Amanda is originally from Singapore and obtained her bachelor's degree in architecture from the Southern California Institute of Architecture, receiving the prestigious Merit Thesis Prize. Amanda, welcome to the show.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And as we were talking before we started rolling, we'll put it right out there. You don't design tiny houses, and that's okay, because I think that there's a lot of crossover and a lot of things that we can be inspired by and learn from in terms of the design work that you do.
Totally. Like, that's kind of what we believe in with architecture and design as well. Like, I don't think it's that specific, like maybe to just start off, like people always ask us like, well, what kind of aesthetics do you guys do? Like, what style do you do? But the thing about style is that we're not trying to coin ourselves in a type of like aesthetic look. Like we don't design based off of a physical outcome in mind.
Okay.
Like we're always we embody like a philosophy, and as long as something is built with that philosophy, then to us that's our design, and that's how we're going to approach things. And that's something that's way more like everlasting. Like that's something that we can grow with versus putting yourself in this box and saying this is the kind of style that I want. For us, style is always changing. Like a physical outcome, like our projects, as you can see, they like vary in terms of aesthetics, but at the end of the day, we very much embody still thoughtful design and careful craftsmanship, which is exactly what we believe in as a firm.
Nice. So, can you talk about some of the elements of Japanese design that inspire your work? Because I definitely know that there are tiny house folks out there who are also really inspired by Japanese design, and I think it'd be interesting to just teach people about what some of those principles are.
Absolutely. So I would say the most pivotal moment for me was somewhat in 2016. it was a trip in 2016 or 2015. I went to Japan for the first time, and actually it wasn't for the first time. It's funny because before we started recording, we had talked about how every travel experience it's how much you take away from it, right? Like traveling is amazing if you are able to like look, not just see. Like if you're in that state, then you are able to absorb a lot from it. And so I was in that state finally. I think I was definitely old enough to do that 2015. And I was probably in my third year of college, architecture school. And so I was able to really, like, I had done all of the theory work.
Yeah.
And so I went to Japan. This was probably like my fifth time, but that was the first trip that I was able to really appreciate everything that I was seeing. And so, like, I was just in awe by the way that people operated. Like, I went to all these spaces, architectural spaces that I had learned about in textbooks, but it really could not hold a candle to seeing them in physical form, because there's only so much that you could read about the theory of these things. But when it comes to careful craftsmanship, right, it's about seeing it in person. It's like understanding that the architects did not scrimp on any type of detail.
Yeah.
It's knowing that like they had the choice to take a shortcut, but they didn't. And it was with that amount of respect that I really delved deep into like the philosophy of Japanese architecture and just Japan in general, like how they operated. And so I saw this in not just architecture, but in every single thing, right? In packaging, in food, in the way that they presented all of their items, just in their way of life. And so like just talking to the locals and just reading up on this and like doing my own research, and like I just figured that like people in Japan, like they're never like, when they do something, it's always because it's like a duty, you know, it's like it's like when they're designing something, they want to design the best thing to the best of their ability versus try to do it for profits or try to do it for any other reason except for like the duty as a designer. So like it's someone gave me this example of like people in all over the world, like when they work at a coffee shop, like they want to be manager, they want to be the boss, they want to do their own thing or something. But people in Japan, when they work at a coffee shop, all they care about is to make the best damn cup of coffee, and that's their job. And so like I really respected that, and I really respected like I guess the sense of responsibility to the act of doing. And with that, like we kind of like we took that philosophy, and that's exactly how I wanted to live my life, how I wanted to operate the firm, how I wanted to just operate as a designer. And so with that, we came in and we applied that philosophy to everything. And I would say that that is the most quote unquote Japanese thing that we took away from Japan and brought and made it our own. Of course, there are other things that we're inspired by that's more aesthetic and more physical that you see, like light wood and clean minimalist like design, not trying to populate with things that you don't need, trying to stick to raw and organic materials. There is an aspect to Japanese design that is very like, it's about, they really value the negative space. They value emptiness. They see that as like a form of possibilities versus like there's no personality.
Got it. Yeah. And one kind of, I believe it's a Japanese design principle that the person who helped me design my tiny home taught me about is it's called Wabi-sabi, which is kind of like it's kind of like embracing imperfection or
Totally.
Perfection through imperfection.
Totally. Absolutely. I think it's also very forward thinking. Like people think that wabi-sabi, there's like this whole thing of like, is that like an abstract philosophy? But it's not. It's actually very forward thinking. It's future oriented. It's sustainable. Like when you think about the word sustainability, right? Like everyone immediately relates the really tangible things like, oh, then solar panels or like ventilation and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But really, what is the word sustainable? It means to plan for the future, that you're basically thinking about the future. And so in Japanese design, like it's about that, right? It very much is sustainable because they are building for the future. And Wabi-sabi as well. Like they are accounting for the imperfections or the growth or the aging process. And they're embracing that and taking that into consideration when they are designing. Like that is actually part of the uniqueness of the product. Like you and I can get the same product, and in years to come, our products will look completely different because of this aging process. And
Right.
when we choose raw materials, when we choose organic materials, like we're embracing that. We love that element. We love that aspect to it. We're not trying to like perfect things in that sense.
Mm-hmm. And I think that there is definitely are strong ties to the idea of minimalism, and that's, people who come to the tiny house movement they're not always doing it because they want to become minimalists, but it definitely involves some level of minimalism. How does minimalism, factor into your design work and some of the kind of ethos of your firm?
So, what we believe in is we care about building designs, putting designs out there that are built to evolve and not just built to last. And again, what that means is that we are basically we're thinking about the future, right? We want a space that is not narcissistic, where it's kind of like, oh, this is our design and it's going to stand the test of time and it's going to stay like this and that's it.
Yep.
And so that's not our ethos. Like our ethos is about already planning for the future, leaving things somewhat empty so that somebody can come in, like these inhabitants can come in and inject their personalities, the way that they like interact with this particular space, to basically turn it, like add new life to it, turn it into a new thing. And then the next person can do the same and so on and so forth. So that's us accounting for growth. And so that's how we view minimalism as well. Like we don't leave things, we don't decorate things, we don't over decorate, but we also don't decorate to the maximum, right? Like we're leaving like emptiness. We're allowing the space to grow and blossom together with the person who's actually going to use the space.
Nice. Can you I really like this thread and this idea. Can you give some like maybe specific examples of how that has like played out in some projects that you've worked on?
Yes, of course. So we have like like one of our latest projects is this house in Mount Washington. And so what happened was that this was like our project, like we developed it from start to finish.
Okay.
And so we saw this house, and it was an old house, like it was a mid-century modern house, beautiful, but like completely abandoned, right? Like just not taken care of. And it looks as if like when you're in LA in the property market, like you're fighting with developers who are just looking at profits. So they're coming in and they're already like they're putting in numbers that like, okay, they probably want to tear this whole thing down. And for us, like we saw so much potential in that. We're so tired of people doing it that way. We're so tired of people just like not being able to embrace like what was happening in the past and what has been done, because there are things to be said. There are things to like appreciate about these things, especially if it's a good mid-century modern design, which it was. And so we fought hard, we got the house, and then we have our own like in-house construction team. So we started working on that, and they already know how we work, right? And so we kind of call it like the sweet spot between preservation and renovation. And that it's like a much more thoughtful process. It's definitely not something that developers love or like want to embrace, like the typical developer, because it's not efficient at all. Like there's no, like it actually like you actually need to be a human being to like figure out what you want to change, what you don't. Like these are decisions that can't be like they're aesthetic decisions. Like they're not like decisions that you can quantify. Do you know what I mean? Like they're
Yeah.
not like, yeah, it's not something you put in a spreadsheet and you're like, oh, economically this makes more sense, which is how
Mm-hmm.
developers operate. And so for us, it was really coming in with the architect hat, right? We, of course, we're developing this, but
Mm-hmm.
we could find the middle ground between that. And so that's what we did. Like we come into every single thing and we're like figuring out like how do we preserve this? And some of these things actually like was like it's not like a decision that people would make, right? Like for
Mm-hmm.
example, there was this wall, this wooden wall, so beautiful, but it was painted on multiple times. But we
Mm-hmm.
got our construction team to stand everything down and restore it back to its original state, which to us, like we could have been like another developer would have come in, either painted another layer on it or
Mm-hmm.
like just pasted like some wood over it. But we didn't want to do that. Like we're just thinking about the future. Everything's always about the future. Like if we preserve this now and we make this more difficult, quote unquote, more difficult move.
Mm-hmm.
And it was economically, it was more expensive and it's like more tedious to do something like that. But
Mm-hmm.
we chose to make decisions like that to like plan for the future, right? And that is an
Right.
example of something that we did. But like other things that we did was also to kind of come up with like to preserve, like to understand that this is a mid-century modern house. So we're not
Yep.
coming in and we're like creating like some like ruckus in this house, right? Like a ostentatious design by any means. Like we're actually bringing in elements and qualities from mid-century modern design and trying to find a new
Mm-hmm.
way to innovate and like bring these materials that are already outdated to create like a new typology in like for what we did was kitchen counters. And so we kind of used glass blocks, which was some like a material that was prevalent during those times, but then it kind of died down a little bit and people
Mm-hmm.
somehow give it like a bad reputation for like being kind of tacky. But we wanted to
Mm-hmm.
find a way because it's a beautiful material. Like it's brick. It's basically bricks. The same. It's used in the same way as brick, but then it's transparent. It allows light in. Well, it's not transparent. It's translucent, and it allows light in, and
Mm-hmm.
it has all these like qualities that were still so good about it. And there's a reason why people in the mid-century modern era use that a lot. And so we tried to like figure out a way to basically, okay, how do we, the whole process of building the house was evaluating the past and then looking at the future, and then now in the present, how do we meld those things together? And given the technology that we have that those people didn't have in the past, like how do we bring these materials and innovate? And that in itself is that forward thinking mentality of preparing for the future, preparing for evolution that we like talked about.
Yeah. You mentioned mid-century modern, and I really like mid-century modern myself. I'm curious, why do you think it's so popular right now? Or maybe it's never gone out of style. But it seems like mid-century modern is a very sought after aesthetic.
I think when things like there are things in the past that like if they stand the test of time, there must be like good things about it, right?
Yeah.
And again, like with mid-century modern, like it definitely has like it evolved from one thing and then it became
Mm-hmm.
what it is today. And like I think that it's having a moment right now because probably like the design, like mid-century modern design itself is it's it's so good that it has stood the test of time, but also like the architects of our time has like they've managed to basically evolve that, right? Like they took
Yeah.
mid-century modern design and somehow made it cool again.
Yeah. I like that. Um, you've spoken about sustainability a bit, and I know that a lot of tiny house enthusiasts and people who are wanting to live this lifestyle are also very concerned about the environment. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on materials choices when you're designing with sustainability in mind? Are there materials that you try not to use? Are there materials that you do try to use? Can you speak to that?
Yeah. Ultimately, like we want, like to us, what's sustainable is obviously what will be built to evolve. And so with that said, like with just that ethos in mind, like we are always picking materials that we feel like could evolve with the owner. And so we don't follow trends. We never advise our clients to be like, oh, this is really trendy, like you should get this. Like it's always really understanding our clients first and foremost. And then from there, it's about like we are always suggesting like materials that are organic. So things that like what we talked about, like it has that wabi-sabi element where it's going to age and it's going to age nicely.
Yeah, that's one that I think is crucial to remember when you're like building something that you want to live in for a long time, that it's nice when you pick materials that when they age, they look nice rather than when they age, they look bad and then need to be replaced.
Totally. And at the same time, it's like, think about it, right? Like what do you want? Like what do you consider sustainable? Like what do you consider something that you would want for the rest of your life? If I was to say, okay, let's just say in a partner, like pick a partner that you want for the rest of your life.
Right.
You want somebody who's able to grow with you. Like you don't want someone who's going to stay the same forever. That's like someone that is just like, for example, plastic, like a plastic chair that's going to stay the same forever. And you don't want that either. That's not sustainable. How do you know you're not going to get bored of that? How do you know that, like, you know, as like you may, I don't know, like being able to pass that down to people, like, is that possible? Right. Like, or like, it's always like, or like the house that you have, like you are always going to, meaning like the environment, right? You are always going to have to shape shift according to that thing that never changes. Versus something that grows with you. You guys are able to grow together. And so, yeah, like that in itself is sustainable. Like that type of ethos is what is sustainable. That's why you would look for materials that have, or furniture pieces that have that quality to them.
Got it. Interesting. When we had booked the interview, I always ask guests, you know, what are one or two questions or topics you'd like to talk about? And one thing that you said is that you'd love to touch on the mental health aspect of being in architecture and design. And I want to hear about that. But I also want to hear if there's anything that you take into consideration when you design for the mental health of the people who will be using and living in that building.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that mental health is like a big thing for me. Like, I mean, I think everybody has like ultimately, I strongly believe that all disciplines are related, right? Like, I don't think that I could be an architect if all I was doing was just studying buildings, like by theory. Like, I have to talk to people, I have to engage, I have to know all the disciplines around me and how the world works in order for me to design for the world. And so, like, I think my like strong thing that drives me is mental health. Like it's like that, like basically, like I think everything starts from mental. Like I think that, like with me, like when we went to Japan again, like in 2016, like on that one trip, like I stayed in this place called like a ryokan, and it's like a thing. People in Japan, they go there, like they travel out of the city and they go into like the countryside, and then they stay at this place called a ryokan, and it's this entire hotel hospitality experience where you go in and you're escaping the city and you're kind of there, and it's like the whole place is designed where it's like it makes you feel so calm, so centered, and the whole experience, like the itinerary, everything is the same. And like I like really like I don't understand why that had to be like a vacation. Like why can't we feel like that every single day? And there's always this idea that like people put where it's like, oh, if you're working hard, you can't it's mutually like exclusive, where hard work and doing what you love and putting in the hours is like it somehow can't coexist with like feeling centered, feeling happy or like content. And like so why is it with spaces it's the same way, where you have to like separate like your workspace from like a space that makes you feel centered and grounded? Like that makes no sense. Moreover, your residential space, right? Like why is it that Japanese people have like a house of a certain look and then they go to like the ryokans and it's completely different? Like, but okay, like you have to escape in order to relax, but then your own home can't have that kind of aesthetic or that kind of feel. And so like I wanted to bring that into all of the spaces that we're designing, especially residential spaces, starting with residential spaces, because that's key, right? Like why shouldn't you feel like that at home? And so in our work, like primarily like biscuit lofts, when I was designing that for my own residential space, it's just like you would not expect it, because it's a loft in the middle of like the busy arts district, and it's an industrial building, and it sounds so like just completely opposite from whatever I just mentioned, right? Like a ryokan that makes you feel centered, that makes you feel like you're in a sanctuary. But that in itself, I believe, even increases productivity. And like it's like a space that's meditative. And like people have this wrong idea about meditation and being in a meditative space, where they think that meditation is doing nothing and it means you're unproductive and you're just relaxing or you're sleeping, whatever. But it's not. It's actually organizing your thoughts. It's giving you that space to kind of like, I'll put it this way, like the analogy that I have is kind of like you're like a ninja. Like you're able to, so instead of just aggressively like fighting and not knowing where to throw your punches and stuff, you're able to strategize and see everything in slow motion, kind of like a scene from the Matrix.
Okay.
So you're able to really
like
defend and block and attack as you like it. And so that's why I strongly believe in meditation. And I think being in a meditative state is the most productive way to work. And so yeah, so like with biscuit lofts, that was what I wanted to achieve. Like I wanted to bring that whole, like I wanted to put that into my residential space, which actually ended up becoming our office. Yeah.
Did you know that was going to happen when you were working on it?
No, so I didn't know. Like I really wanted that to be my residential space. I designed it for my residential space. And yeah, so that was like one of the first few projects that we designed and built completely. And so it completed like right smack in the middle of COVID. And then I still had my apartment at that time. And it was just so difficult to move during COVID. So I didn't try, but I would go over to the new house to kind of like work from there. And then slowly I was just really enjoying working from there. And then I decided to just move the office there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I like to ask my guests in one form or another is, what are 2 or 3 books or resources or things that that you look to for design inspiration that you'd like to share with the listeners of the show?
In an odd way, I like reading cookbooks.
Okay.
So I'm going to share like one cookbook that I really like.
Please.
It's Monk. It's titled Monk.
Okay.
And
like
it's
MONK, Monk?
Yeah. And
okay.
It's a cookbook, and it's by this pizza maker in Kyoto. He owns a pizza restaurant.
Okay.
The book is like absolutely beautiful, and I really like all the writing and the way he talks about like why he does what he does, and like it's just very inspiring to me. And yeah, you feel inspired when you read that for sure.
Nice.
Yeah, I also like books and like manifestos by Louis Kahn. So anything by him is good, and I would highly recommend.
Awesome. And can you say who Louis Kahn is for the uninitiated?
Yeah, he's an incredible architect. He built like the Salk Institute, pretty famous one in San Diego. He built a lot of like really great things. He was the architect that famously coined the phrase, like he asked the brick like what it wanted to be, and it said he wanted to be a brick, so he let it be a brick. And it's so philosophical, right? It sounds crazy and it sounds so simple, but it's also like, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Amanda Gunawan, thank you so much for being a guest on the show. It was fun to talk.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was fun to talk.
Thank you so much to Amanda Gunawan for being a guest on the show today. You can head over to thetinyhouse.net/235 to see photos of Amanda's design work, a complete transcript of this interview, and more. And don't forget to head over to tinyhousesummit.co and register for the 2022 free Tiny House Summit. It's really a wonderful event, and I can't wait to share these 30 inspiring, powerful sessions with you. So that website is tinyhousesummit.co. That's tinyhousesummit.co. And I will see you in November. That is all for this week. I am your host, Ethan Waldman, and I'll be back next week with another episode of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast.